the skills gap has been well documented and well discussed at this point in time. From my own perspective, I kind of look at the situation to say, if you look at where our economy is growing and you look at the demand for jobs, clearly across the whole IT sector, clearly across sort of pharmaceuticals, biomedical, the sort of research and development, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, that's clearly where there's a huge demand for talent and skills in this country. And unfortunately, there are sort of two problems. Problem number one is just the availability of those skills today in the job market, which our most recent report around the skills gap in Ireland highlighted the fact that we interviewed over 100 employers and 45% of them have open roles and positions in maths and engineering today. So that's the first problem, that we have an issue today. The second problem we have is that, the way I've described it in the past is that the message has not got to the mammies and daddies of Ireland in relation to what courses that students are selecting going into university. So if you look at the CAO applications, the number of students that are actually going in to do the STEM subjects, which are, science, technology, engineering and maths, is not anywhere near where it needs to be if we're to sort of fill the skills and the talent in the future. Because interesting enough, in that report, the company spoke about the skills gap and the issues, but they weren't talking about it today. They were looking 1, 2, 3 years out and talking about the fact that they saw the skills gap potentially getting worse as opposed to getting better. And that has huge implications for Ireland's economic growth. If you look at the emerging technologies and the emerging trends that are happening, across business and indeed across both the private sector and the public sector, the whole area of analytics, the whole big data, the challenge for companies, the challenge for government organizations is that they have more and more data to deal with and less information. Therefore, analytics becomes a hugely important part of that solution. If you look at the whole digital wave now in terms of mobility, the convergence of mobile and internet, and more organizations looking at what does a digital landscape look like for them, what are the sort of skills and technologies they'll need, what does the digital enterprise really mean, and what are the implications of that. So all of those areas require strong technology skills. And if you look at specifically in the analytics area, which I think is important, is that you need graduates who are very strong in maths, or very strong in statistics, or very strong in management science. And outside of that, they are the disciplines you need for really strong analytics people. And therefore, there's more and more demand for those types of skills because, whether it's customer insight, whether it's fraud, whether it's compliance, the demand for analytics and the demand for understanding an organization's data and really getting information that helps them make decisions is becoming a massive part of how they do business. The reality is for a lot of the STEM subjects and for a lot of the graduates that are looking for, this is a problem right across Europe. Because in the case of Accenture, when we opened our analytics centre here in May 2011, we're going to grow that to 100 jobs over the next 3 years. We've found it very difficult to source that talent here, but we have more and more now looked outside the borders of Ireland to try and see where can we get that talent. Eastern Europe and places like that, because even in the United Kingdom, which is our closest big market, there's a shortage of those type of skills. So it is not an Irish problem, but the advantage that Ireland has is because we're a small country, because we're dealing with a relatively small number of third-level institutions, and because we have the focus and attention of the government, and because business is crying out for them, we are in a special case where we can move a lot faster than some of these bigger countries and try to solve the problem for ourselves. I go back to a picture that that was drawn back in the 80s, and it's quite a good analogy, I think. You know, back in the 80s, Ireland suffered a little bit in terms of, you know, what were the industries we were going to focus on? What did we want to become famous for? And at that time, you know, a paper was drawn up, a vision, a North Star, whatever you want to call it, was drawn up that Ireland should become a technology, a pharmaceutical and a medical devices hub for Europe. That's where the focus should be in terms of developing new industries for Ireland in our position in Europe and in our position in the EU. And if you look at what happened then, business, academia and government got together. And the government created the policies, they created the focus of the IDA and Enterprise Ireland and organisations like that in those sectors. The universities created the third level courses and the disciplines to create the sort of graduates we needed to work in those sort of industries. And business stood back and said, we will create the jobs if government has the right focus and policy, and if the graduates are there, we will create the right jobs. And here we are in 2012, and if you look at the strong industries we have in this country, if you look at the IT industry and you look at the pharmaceutical and the biomedical device, there was, you know, the success speaks for itself. And, you know, a similar comparison could be given to the IFSC, where, you know, there are now 48,000 people working in the IFSC, which again was a focus around what we could create. I think what we could do today is have much better joined up thinking. I think there's a significant number of good initiatives going on. You know, from a government point of view, I think the universities are very focused on what are the type of skills and graduates they need to produce. And I think the business issues are, as we've articulated, in terms of skill gaps and this sort of thing. However, it's nowhere near as joined up and as focused as it should be from an Ireland Inc. point of view. And therefore, I think we're missing the opportunity to really sort of address this issue at a national level. If you look in Ireland, we have two problems and a paradox. Problem number one is that we have an unemployment rate of 14.6%. And on the other side, we have acute skill gaps in a number of different areas. And therein lies the paradox. You know, how can that possibly be? Now, it's very clear that you can't take people from the unemployment lists and just put them into highly skilled jobs. And therefore, you know, the question is, well, how do you make the migration, and more importantly, how quickly can you do that? So if you look at the survey that we recently completed on the skills gap, it was interesting to see that 33% of the companies that we spoke to saw that the skills gap, that they were primarily responsible for filling that skills gap, and that it wasn't something that the government should be doing, or it wasn't something that universities should be doing. And I think what we've defined is that if companies became much more focused on how they pulled talent through their organization, how their succession planning worked, and were effectively, rather than going to the market and saying, look, I can't find the skill gap, I've only got to leave the position open, but more importantly, to look down their organization and say, well, no, there are lots of very talented people that with training or experience, they could actually do this job, and begin a thing of pulling the talent through the organization. And if they do that, they will create jobs at the lower end of their company, which can be filled by people coming off the unemployment register who do some training or do some development, and in that way, you know, help to solve the unemployment problem. Because it's a situation that, you know, the government are trying to resolve. It's a situation that, you know, lots of people are focused on, but it's a question of all the stakeholders having a responsibility, and that includes employers. Most importantly, seeing themselves as developers of skills, not just consumers of skills. And there, I think, is an important change in mindset for some companies.